and you all can begin.
Hi, I'm Grace Mugo, and I'm here with my fellow associates, Reese and Brendan, here for the 2022 Summer Associates Takeover. So we would like to begin our discussion with a land acknowledgement because we are all spread out all across the country. So I would like to begin. So I'm here in Austin, Texas, and we acknowledge and respect that the land that we live, work on, and enjoy is the land of the indigenous people of the Plain tribes, including the Lipan Apalache, the Comanche, and the Tonakawa. Sorry for butchering. Would anyone like to go next?
I can go next. Thankfully, my host institution already has a text drafted, so I'm just going to be reading that one. I am on Smith College campus in Northampton, Massachusetts, and Smith College acknowledges and appreciates the fact that the space in which we gather is built within the ancestral homelands of the Nonotuck peoples. We also recognize our present-day neighboring indigenous nations, the Nipmuc and the Wampanoag to the east, the Mohegan, Pequot, and Narragansett to the south, the Mohican and Mohawk to the west, and the Abenaki to the north.
And my name is Brandon. I'm residing in Los Angeles, California, currently in Koreatown, and we'd like to acknowledge the Tongva, Gavilano, and the Chumash nations. I apologize if any of that was mispronounced.
Great. So we can begin with your position here at Creative Reactions Lab, your pronouns, your name, where you're from, what school do you go to, and what year you are at university. So I'll begin. My name is Grace Mugo. I'm a marketing and communications associate this summer at Creative Reactions Lab. I'm a rising sophomore at Brown University, and I live here in Austin, Texas. My pronouns are she, hers, hers. Would anyone like to go next?
I can go. I am also a marketing and communications associate. My name is Reese. I am a rising senior at Smith College. I use he, they pronouns, and right now I am in Northampton, as I mentioned earlier, but I am originally an international student from Bucharest, Romania.
Okay. My name is Brandon. I'm residing currently in Koreatown, Los Angeles. I go to CMC, or also known as Claremont McKenna College. I'm a rising sophomore, and my pronouns are he, him, his.
Awesome. So we can begin with how you guys heard about this internship opportunity at Creative Reactions Lab. If you had heard of the organization before, and and if you'd like to talk about your process of applying or like your initial thoughts, feel free to add that as well. So I can begin. So I heard about Creative Reactions Lab through a scholarship opportunity at my school called Echoing Green Social Entrepreneurship. And so Brown had partnered with Creative Reactions Labs for a number of years. And so I applied to the scholarship in general, and then I named a couple of companies that I wanted to work with if I had been accepted to that scholarship. And so I chose Creative Reactions Lab after looking it up because I really admired their vision, and I saw that they had worked to address structural inequalities with a number of partnership corporations like Adobe and Google. And I was just beyond impressed and beyond honored to do this work. And I had some previous experience with nonprofits, especially nonprofit education. So yeah, that's how I found out about this position. Would you like to go next, Reese?
Yeah, I can go. I found out through a similar sort of like program at my college at Smith. This one's called CLDI, and oh my God, let me see if I can remember what it stands for. Collaborative Leadership Design Immersions, which was sort of, it was sort of a fellowship that connected Smithies with different organizations across the world. Me and another associate from the summer got connected to CRX Lab, and it's been absolutely wonderful. I did know about it. I did know about the organization from beforehand because it had been mentioned by some of the mentors that I previously had at Smith within the like design justice or like equity and like yeah, equity, that sort of like a realm of extracurriculars. I'd taken some classes, and a lot of the people that were training me had been trained intern by folks from CRX Lab. And so I have seen some of their materials referenced before. And I had like a basic level of familiarity with creative reaction lab stuff. But I mean, obviously I've found out significantly more since being holding my position as an associate here. Brandon, do you want to go?
Yeah, sure thing. For me, it was around, well, I've heard of Creative Reaction Lab way before entering college, actually during the beginning of the pandemic, as part of one of their programs. I received some funding to do some of an events that I wanted to do online. Uh, and through that, I entered college, and our college tends to do this thing where they try to promote having an internship by the end of the summer, or by the beginning of the summer, my apologies. That way, throughout, we gain experience and we overall enhance our landscape. Uh, and one of the options were Creative Reaction Lab, which was offered by the Kravis Lab, which focuses on mainly I guess the promotion of entrepreneurship as well as equity and just overall growth and improvements. And so I decided to apply to it, knowing that this program has helped me and has helped others like me. And overall, it was just an exciting thing to look forward to. And yeah, really great experience thus far.
Great. What projects or initiatives have you been involved in at Creative Reactions Lab? And has there been a particularly meaningful project or initiative that you've been involved with that has changed your perception of equity, justice, or nonprofit work in general? I can begin. So, as an associate for communications and marketing, a lot of my work involves working in graphic design to create promotional campaigns that will later be posted on social media sites such as LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok. And another is also working on marketing campaigns, whether that is through email or writing articles, working hand on hand with the projects team and working with as well as like the youth that we are involved in with our organization. So one project that has been particularly impactful for me is the Artists for Equity initiative that we have been rolling out this summer. And so this particular iteration of Art for Equity focuses on women's access to healthcare and the overturning of Roe v. Wade. And so my job was to create articles as well as promotional material to see how people can get involved with this campaign, learn more about women's access to healthcare, funding organizations, how we can reach out to community leaders and government officials to start having these conversations and start supporting these accesses for women or also minority gender identities. And so it was particularly impactful for me because I'm like a huge lover of art, and I understand. I used to think that the one of the only ways, or I guess my perception of the ways that art can be used to promote change was sort of more on a conceptual level, the way that art pieces can be used to ask questions or expose corruption, hypocrisy, exploitation within like a particular context or the society, or to address issues. But I never really saw the more practical, action-based, or fiscal ways that art can be used to create change. So I think working on this promotional material and seeing sort of firsthand how we can both have conceptual art that asks questions and challenges authority, but we can also have art that like promotes certain organizations or gains money to help dismantle systems. I just was really in awe, especially hearing from young artists as well and hearing about their process and stuff like that. It was just an amazing thing to be a part of. Would anyone like to go next?
I can go. Yeah, some of the most probably like some of the most voluminous work that I've done this summer, and some of the most meaningful at the same time, has been some review of existing materials. Just sort of like seeing everyone's work And yeah, everyone's insight, just sort of like seeing what everyone can offer, the different nuances of something. Like it's especially meaningful when you can like sort of see the puzzle, you can sort of like witness the puzzle pieces like clicking into place, or like metaphorical like Lego building blocks after they've been like added by several, like it's a base document that's been like edited a couple of times by several people, and it just sort of like continues getting built on. So yeah, just collaborative work of any kind, which there's been a lot that I have seen in the last couple of weeks. And yeah, I don't know, just something about the way that CRX Lab is constructed. It feels like I've been on a journey to, learn more about equity, design, justice, about all of these different like things and values that CRX Lab holds like close and near and dear to their heart. And it feels like this space particularly is one of the ones where uncovering blind spots and stuff like that has been the easiest, just because I'm sort of exposed to a lot more material, and but also because of the way through which they've like they as an organization, or just like we have been, or at least I have been exposed to information, like the pace at which it happened and everything. I don't know, it just like felt very organic. So it sort of made everything feel meaningful. Because it feels like there's something in every single project that I've been involved in that I didn't know before. Like there's definitely like several somethings too, not just like a singular something. So yeah.
Thank you so much for that. For me, I'm a programs associate here at Creative Reaction Lab, and essentially what I've done this past few weeks and months is essentially just support the continuous improvement and overall quality monitoring of youth and educator programming. Some examples would be like Seeds of Power fellowship program, which helps Black and Latinx youth essentially go ahead and improve on themselves and their community, as well as other similar programs with different subjects. Of course, some taken on roles of educating the youth on, let's say, media, marketing, such careers that they want to pursue, and how they could use that in order to change the communities and overall bring forth a sense of progressiveness and improvements in their lives. Something that a lot of people tend to overlook and is not usually seen as something professional or curricular, which we truly believe should be changed. And overall, I think it was just a great experience being in this part of sort of apprenticeship in a sense. I guess where Creative Reaction Lab, as previously mentioned, is a community that is uniquely built, and overall it has brought forth different minds, but yet all like-minded in a sense, where we all want to bring this sense of goal where overall improvements and just equity and design is our goal. And I think all I can say is just I'm proud to be here, and I love these past few weeks working with everyone.
Yeah, great. Me too. Um, I I really appreciate both of y'all's sentiments. My next question is, how has CRX Lab been different from any internship that you've had, if you've had any, or previous places of employment? If so, if it is different, explain how and how you feel about those differences. Yeah, so I can begin by sort of noting that I think the first thing that I noticed when I first joined Creative Reactions Lab is that our CEO, Antoinette Carroll, decides, actually is very adamant about us not being called interns, but being called associates. And I had never heard of that before. And it's not like I've necessarily had a previous internship before. I think this is like the first internship that I can say like, yeah, like I'm an intern, because before I was working as a teacher in a nonprofit education space. And then that was like the only job I had previously. But I think that it was so meaningful that we like our titles is more than just an intern, we're associates. And I think Antoinette and all of our other supervisors really made us feel like we were part of the organization and that our input mattered and that our voices mattered. And, you know, it didn't matter that maybe we were still in university or we didn't have as much experience as our supervisors or that we were young and inexperienced. We were still seen as able to contribute new ideas and make big contributions to the company. And I really appreciate that. And I think that the way that I think particularly here in America, internships are looked at is oftentimes rooted in ageism and how interns are often like underpaid and unexperienced and are kind of seen as like they have nothing to offer, or you know, they're lucky to be even getting this break, so like why should, you know, they be respected or be taken seriously. And I think that that really speaks to the way that Creative Reaction Labs thinks about dismantling these systems of injustice and how we center youth voices in our work, because objectively Creative Reaction Labs views youth as value. So yeah, I really like that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that very much like sort of follows the organizational value that CRX Labs is trying to uphold, you know, power shifting, the whole concept of like, oh, making sure that power is being shifted around, for lack of a better explanation off the top of my head. And yeah, I mean, my answer is very much other common practices here. Like I was thinking about language setting and how we tend to include language setting in every meeting, and how it starts with like, oh, these are the terms, this is what they mean. Sort of asking also for input on whether anyone has any nuance to be adding to the existing definition. And yeah, just practices that sort of like intentionality put into absolutely everything, or into most things, into a lot of things that other places do not. I have had internships before, and they have been with like smaller organizations, so I can also see why it might have been like hard for other people to be implementing this. But I definitely think that the system, or like the yeah, the sort of the system or methodology that CRX Lab has going, it feels very it feels like it makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah. For me, Creative Reaction Lab is actually a pretty drastically, I wouldn't say drastically, but completely different, I guess, internship than previous ones I've had before. I have had a lot of internships within my college, and a lot of them have been involvements with programs in events management mainly. Uh, Essentially like dealing with alumni and organizing events for them, creating, I guess, circles and spaces in where they can come back to the campus and just feel at home, etc. So Creative Reaction Lab has definitely felt different in the sense where I feel like I'm not just reaching out to a local community, rather more I'm expanding across other communities, as well as just the work that I've been put to do is also different. Before it would be mostly me going ahead, opening spreadsheets and counting the names, seeing how many resources we need, how many resources we have, reaching out to other alumni. A Creative Reaction Lab, I feel it's more fundamental in the sense where I'm creating that resource. I'm inputting my own sense of humanity in that as well. I don't feel like I'm working for someone, rather I'm working for something that I want to achieve and improve on my community. And it's just been an amazing experience in where the power is shifting, as well as previously mentioned, isn't where the person who is quote unquote my boss is someone who I have to fear that I'm going to disappoint in the future, rather more someone who I could seek help and knowledge for, because time does tell how much like experience you have. So what's so afraid of like, what's so scary of like asking people for help? So I feel like that's what Creative Reaction Lab has been doing, that I feel like Reese has had is right. It just feels right. It feels organic. It just feels like it belongs there.
Yeah, I agree. And I've noticed that all three of us have sort of talked about this idea of power shifting and how Creative Reactions Lab like does that just so well. I think more than any previous company that I've worked with. Well, I mean, I think that the other nonprofit that I worked with, they were just targeting something a little bit different. But I really think that, you know, one thing that we can all sort of admire about Creative Reactions Lab, sorry about the background, it's a little bit loud here. A lot of people living in my house. Is that instead of just conceptualizing these ideas about how we can sort of relocate resources, uplift certain communities, and you know, just solve issues of inequality, I think that Creative Reactions Lab is really good at sort of putting actions into these concepts, whereas a lot of other like places, organizations, and people will sort of just intellectualize things too much and maybe not like think about the actual people that they're trying to help. And I think that one thing that Creative Reactions does especially well is even implementing it within our own like employee system, where like even the concept of like employees like feels sort of unnatural to say in the context of, you know, the Creative Reactions Lab setting, because there's this whole sort of dismantling going on where it's like it's not this, you know, boss employee dynamic. It's like we are all equals and contributors to the company. And like the way that we have like language around certain things, like we don't say like minorities or stuff like that, or just things that sort of create these like power dynamics of like have and have nots, like we say like historically disadvantaged. And you know, I think that language and the ways that we can run companies better, where we're eliminating these sort of colonial like white supremacist ideas, like design thinking is something we also talk about, like these ideas of how companies should run. When we sort of look at that more objectively and we see these power structures existing within our own structure, it makes it easier for us to now critique outside culture and try to help the communities that we want to partner with. So yeah. Okay, so my next question is, what was your previous understanding of equity and justice before working at Creative Reactions Lab? Has that changed at all? Has Creative Reactions Lab given you new insights to how you view these concepts? Or if they haven't, how have they affirmed what you previously believed? And yeah, explain how you got to that point, if you would like. Would anyone else like to begin this segment?
I can start. I think I had a fairly similar understanding to equity and justice that I have now, but that was also mostly because, as I think I mentioned before, some of my mentors from Smith had been trained by Creative Reaction Lab. So yeah, it's almost like that intentionality got like passed on through someone else, which also felt like very interesting because it felt like I was introduced to two different approaches and two different interpretations of the methodology that CRX Lab uses. And yeah, I will definitely say that it has grown significantly more nuanced. I feel like I have gained a better understanding of it. I feel like I also now, I don't know, it feels like I ran into some roadblocks along the way, and I actually like it's a sort of like I felt palpable progress in the way that I was thinking about them and the way that I was noticing certain patterns pop up in different conversations. So I definitely feel like yeah, it was a sort of like really nice application of all of the theory that I have been sort of taking in. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, for me, my definitions of, or like at least when I've learned the definitions of justice and equity, they are similar to that of Creative Reaction Lab. But I have learned a lot more here than I think I previously have in these past few years, especially with pandemic, not being able to socialize with other people, at least in person, until like just recently. Um, and definitely some subjects such as history and healing, community help, those things that I believed I had known and already in the definition or set of words were completely uh I guess, just analyzed and broken down, because there are a lot of nuances that take place and are garnered here at Creative Reaction Lab that I feel like are necessary when we try to define these certain things, especially when it comes to justice and equity. There might be a word that clearly defines it as it is, but as I've seen in many other presentations here at Creative Reaction Lab, uh, is that there's more to just the definition. There's people who've gone through these words. There's intention in these words, and overall, there's action that occurs that can't just be defined. And I feel like Creative Reaction Lab has taught me that, and it's done it really well. And I feel like I can bring it to my community later on.
Great, that's awesome. So I think that my understanding of equity and justice has definitely changed a lot since I worked here. I think similar to Reese, I had been very familiar with sort of the concepts of addressing like institutional inequity and stuff like that, kind of like stuck in like that whole like idea of like, okay, like I see what's wrong, but like not really like kind of feeling overwhelmed and not really seeing how to solve it or like the practical ways that people are addressing it. I think it was just sort of just small mindedness, I think, and like you just like not knowing just a lot about the nonprofit sector and things like that. But I think that Creative Reactions Lab really showed me that I think the best way to address structural inequality is through partnership with these communities that we are trying to help. Well, even like I don't know, like even just saying that, like, oh, we're trying to like help these people, like we're trying to like save these people, like that whole sort of thinking is wrong. And I think I already sort of had that idea, but I never really saw a space outside of it where like the way that social justice and addressing inequality is often framed is like we have to help this community, like we have to save them. Whereas at Creative Reactions Lab, I think I finally got to see the sort of more material ways. I mean, not even material, you know the word, like sort of like the more tangible ways that instead of having this dynamic where it's one power like that has all the answers helping the Black and Latinx community or people that live below the poverty line, instead of doing that whole dynamic, we are instead trying to hear what they have to say and what their thoughts are, especially young people, and working hand in hand with them in a partnership so we can uplift themselves like together, rather than like people going in and saving them and then being like, oh, aren't you thankful that I helped you? Because I think that that whole dynamic of like people trying to step in and speak for people, even if it is in good intention, like creates sort of these very easily exploited dynamics, And I think that the way that Creative Reaction Labs particularly centers youth activism and what youth have to say, I think has been very radical for me, because I feel like my whole life, and I think especially like in the media, like youth voices are barely like centered or talked about. You just go on like CNN or like Apple News, like no one's talking about what young people are doing, and if anything, it's always like they're always talking about how we're like a detriment to society, or like we're lazy or blah 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 blah. Like there's just this whole negative aspect that youth have nothing to offer there, especially because we're not as educated or as experienced, which is true, but because of that, people don't even look to youth for the answers to solve world problems. And I think especially here in the States, where I think the average age of politicians is like 65 and up. So like we hold very little like political like power or representation. So I think realizing the importance of youth voices and my own voice as a youth has really changed the way that I think about the dynamics of addressing structural racism and inequality. Okay, my next question is, what is a concept on equity and justice that you've particularly been interested these days? You've been particularly interested in these days? Any sort of, books or podcasts or videos or even like a movie that inspired you, that you've just been thinking about lately? It doesn't have to be something, super well thought out. It can be casual, it can be you delving into it, whatever you feel like you want to say. But yeah.
I actually happen to be working on another project this summer alongside my position as an associate here. I am working on research that will potentially turn into a thesis. I'm not very sure yet, but it's kind of related to the concept and to the point where it talks. Well, I started thinking about it by thinking about like radicalization pipelines online, which sort of feels like it ties into a lot of other experience, like a lot of other like studies and like ways in which people have found that equity and justice affect online spheres. So yeah, I guess just sort of the online applications of a lot of the real world things that we've been like talking about, which like online is also the real world, so like how do you because the conversation about like trying to potentially regulate anything online is also very nuanced. And so yeah, just getting into all of that.
Yeah, for me, it would, I guess, pieces of media or film or overall just observation around me would be such. I guess one example I would bring up would probably be like the movie Roma, which is a few years old, I believe. Uh, it was pretty popular for doing a lot of things, especially in the film industry, and it brought upon to my thoughts of like putting in a setting of two domestic workers essentially doing work that is quite common in a lot of communities, but we don't look at them, we don't see them as protagonist roles, we don't see them as roles that are even worthy of filming. But I feel like Roma does do that in a sense, give it justice. And a lot of their actresses came under fire for even being who they are. Um, uh, Especially in communities where you would believe that uh, these films, these, I guess, pieces of media that speak uh, to the life of of the average person in these communities, you would expect them to be a lot more supportive, but seeing the coverage, seeing the media that was put out against it was really to my surprise. And I guess it speaks towards a lot of what we see nowadays. Every time there's a radical change in something, there's always going to be radical opposing to it. uh and it's just been like that with a lot of the media and film that I've seen around me as well. I guess a lot of the quote unquote help that we try to provide tends to be at times negative repercussions towards other communities because they're underrepresented. So I guess what I'm trying to get at here is that we still have a long way to go, especially when it comes to media, to try to even represent a whole community, because we can't put them under an umbrella. I know for in my community in Koreatown, it's predominantly Chicano, Mexican American, or a lot of immigrants here, and a lot of people here are really under put the umbrella of Mexican. When in reality, there's a lot more than that. I'm Guatemalan. I'm part Mayan. My dad is indigenous from Guatemala. I was born in Guatemala. There's other things that come into play, and I think just that umbrella effect that we tend to generalize things, really set out to me. And every time I look at a piece of media, I try to I guess develop it as much as I can in my head.
Yeah, thank you for both of your insights. Extremely insightful. I really love the movie Roma. I saw it, I think, a year or two ago, and I found it very moving. And I also was reading about the backlash for the actress and like because of her ethnicity and all of that. And I also thought that it was a very fascinating and beautiful film. I think that me as well, I often think about media and sort of thinking about what are the roles that media has like in our society, and what has it had in the past, like what should it have in the future, and I think identity as well. And I do study some media theory at school. But yeah, I think that, I don't know, it's endlessly like fascinating to me. And about like media representation, like I have so many thoughts. I think that for me, in terms of creative reactions labs and like concepts that I've been thinking about recently, I mean, a lot of them are tied with tied to the creative reactions lab. And I think that I will speak on media later, just because it's something I think about. But I think in terms of like a new idea, creative reactions lab has really gotten me thinking about sort of radicalizing the workplace and power dynamics like within the workplace. I feel like I already talked about this, but like I just think that it really got me thinking about the way that we run things, especially in like very highly capitalist spaces, is oftentimes rooted in white supremacy. And I think that the conversations we had in creative reactions labs, especially in the beginning of our associateship, about sort of design thinking, professionalism, like precision, like things having to be on time and done now. And like, I didn't realize that those things were rooted in white supremacy and were rooted in colonialization and things like that. And again, just like that power dynamic of like boss and employee, and then CEO and boss, and then employee, like, just like thinking about those concepts and how easy it is to exploit people. And I think that since you mentioned Roma, Brendan, like even on like another level of people that work wage jobs or blue collar work, quote unquote, like what are those power dynamics at play? And also what happens when, we have these very strict, harsh sort of environments created by late stage capitalism, where people have to work hours at a time. They don't have time to, not only relax and rejuvenate and be healthy and heal from a number of things going on, and also our histories and our past, and to just enjoy life, but also like when we don't have time, and when our time has been quite literally colonized, we don't have time to think about the power structures at play and why people feel the need to be, it's not even like the need, but the necessity to be working for, rising inflation rates. Like, I don't know, just thinking about those things. My next question is also kind of similar to what you brought up, Brendan, and it's about identity. So my question is, how does your identity or past experiences influence the work or the projects that you do at Creative Reactions Lab, or even like what you study in school? Because I know that that has come up. And, how have you, worked to sort of maybe create representation or like certain language settings to make sure that, members of the identities that you are a part of or you're not a part of feel heard, represented, and seen?
I think when it comes to my community and the way I viewed identity for a long time, I guess I like to say I don't know myself yet, and that my identity is bound to change about like perceive the people I meet, the media I see, the food I eat, even, right? Um, and I think for me in a long time, one of the few parts of my identity that I do know for sure is me being Guatemalan. Previously mentioned, like I guess the second stigma you find here for not belonging somewhere. They do say, like, in I guess in psychological scientific matters, we do tend to cater for more communities as well, because that's like embedded in our brains. But I do think it's more complex than that. Um, but in my community, there's always been this stigma where if you're not like everyone else, you're bad, right? It's like you're not normal, you're not this, right? And that normal for me was not being Mexican or not being in a certain Mexican identity. Uh, which I find nothing wrong with that. It's just a matter of the way it was approached. When I was growing up, my friends would, or at least people when I would like get to know them in my high school or elementary, even middle school, they would ask me where I'm from. Like, I'm Guatemalan, I'm part Mayan, and they'd be like, "Oh, you're Guatemalan, so you're not Mexican." Oh, well, they would make fun of me or tease me for being that, call me nicknames. And of course, I would never appreciate that. And I thought that was just a norm. But moving into new community, moving into Claremont McKenna College and even Creative Reaction Lab, I realized that should never be the norm. That isn't the norm. Identity is more than that. And I guess this normalization of just grouping and putting an outsider in order to make that grouping quote unquote stronger is something that I've always tried to eliminate, especially in friend groups that I meet now. Um, and overall, I feel like it's been getting better, especially in my community. People are becoming more aware of these situations, how identity is really important, and how the isolation of other people is not the way to go, especially when it comes to try to resolve a quote unquote problem. Uh, and overall, it's something I've been proud of, especially I would consider it a work of mine to find that identity that I am still continuing to grow and develop, uh, and overall fostering other people as well and being proud of themselves and just being who you are.
I love that. Thank you for sharing, and also sharing like more vulnerable parts of like your past and like your community. We really appreciate that.
Yeah, thank you for the answer. That was wonderful. It made me think of a bunch of other things on top of what I was initially going to respond, which I think I took a slightly different interpretation to the question. But yeah, no, I've very much found myself embracing that like fluidity and identity and like growing into it and how much it like sort of like shifts with those growing pains. So that's definitely resonated. But sort of like the initial direction that I had taken towards the question was some ways in which I've been able to take my sort of my identity within my work, I guess, which yeah, that feels similar when I say it like that. But anyways, I was specifically thinking about my identity as neurodivergent and sort of everything that it's like, or all of the ways in which my team members, my supervisor, everyone has just sort of been super welcoming towards everything that I've needed in terms of like accommodations or yeah, they've just been like very welcoming towards my sometimes overwhelming need for specificity in certain tasks. And it's sort of like been very nice to see the ways in which they've just sort of like naturally adapted to a lot of that. Because yeah, it feels like almost like a case study application of a lot of the like values or the morals that they hold close. And so it's yeah, again, it's like it's just nice to see that they practice what they preach, basically.
Yeah, I totally agree with the thing you just said about how Creative Reactions Lab like practices what they preaches, and I'm glad to hear that you guys have both had positive experiences working like within like your identities, your given identities at Creative Reactions Lab, and it's a place where you feel comfortable to be yourself in all aspects of that concept. Um, I would say for me, okay, going back to the topic about media, as somebody that works in marketing and communications, and also someone that just adores like media, art, film, movies, I think that I use my identity as a Black woman for like as a media creator to sort of make sure that the people and the voices that I highlight in promotional campaigns are not only people that look like me, but people that represent a whole diaspora of people. I think, especially growing up, just viewing sort of the media of like the 2000s and the 2010s, and like even now, okay, like it's very clear that there's a lot of representation lacking in terms of just even, I think I'm specifically like having, the idea of like what images we promote, and what people are featured in campaigns. Like oftentimes it appeals to the Western Eurocentric white beauty standard, in terms of like skin tone and facial features and body sizes and gender like expression. And so when I try to create content as a graphic designer, and I also have another position where I'm also a graphic designer, marketing type of person, I really try to go out of my way to make sure that we are seeing expressions across like all varieties of like gender expression, body sizes, skin tones, facial features, because I think the more that people see those types of things in promotional materials, the more it becomes normalized, and the more that our very colonized, warped view of beauty and worthiness, like who gets to be put on a billboard, can change. And I think a lot of people will always like complain or sort of belittle the impact of media and be like, oh, who cares who's on like these promotional things for companies or magazines or billboards, like they can do whatever they want, like, or like it doesn't really matter, like we have like bigger fish to fry, that whole idea. But I think that media has the power to change people's mind and ask questions. It's kind of like what I was talking about with like visual art, kind of like similar things, even if it's something as little as like a postcard or a poster, it has the power to get people to ask those sort of questions and expand what they know. And so I really try, like as like a woman of color and as a Black woman, like to make sure that people have that opportunity to question, and that other Black women and people of color can see themselves in the things that I'm creating, like I wanted to see at a younger stage in life. Uh, okay. Ooh, okay. This is kind of similar to some questions, but I think it's more about like youth and like what's currently going on. So, similar to identity, what are your thoughts on equity, justice, the current state of the world, etc., as a member of Gen Z or the most recent generation? How can younger generations do their part to promote values of equity and justice as youth or young people that are involved in this kind of work? Is there anything that you would like to say to other people our age about how they can, get involved in the things that we're doing this summer, or sort of resources to explore more about these topics and things like that? And this will be our last question.
I can definitely answer first because sadly I do have another meeting to run to. I think as an international student, I sort of like definitely saw different facets of it through how much I was involved in, or like how much I knew of the activism sphere in the US versus Romania. And there's definitely there's a strange amount of similarities, I would say, in the ways that systems all across the world are like that. Systemic inequity is something that's so, I know it's like burrowed so deep into a lot of systems that like they manifest themselves in very similar ways. And so I think that if anything, I feel like folks all over the world have just sort of like been able to organize in very, very like wonderful and like impressive ways. And sort of to the point of like, oh, if anyone would be interested in sort of like this sort of thing, I think one of my main concerns when I started out was that I didn't have any sort of like niche that I was really, really interested in. I was more so just like finding out about the landscape, just like learning about everything. And it took like several very specific instances to find something specific that was calling to me, that was like personally meaningful to me. And it took a lot of a lot of reflection and a lot of exploring it, like exploration. So I feel like, yeah, just allowing the time for that and understanding that like that is part of the journey. Um, and sort of like understanding the ways in which like one's first response is to understanding that they have a lot of like internalized like have internalized a lot of the like messaging of capitalism is also like the first reactions of that, of like finding that out, will also be influenced by in like ways in which we've internalized capitalism, and understanding and like yeah, being graceful towards oneself. Just again, a lot of the different things that equity centered community design is already, you know, addressing basically.
Yeah. Thank you so much for that. For me, it's somewhat similar. But as someone living in California for a long amount of time, for most of my life actually, I think it's as someone from Gen Z, I think a lot of the things we see is oh, okay, bye bye. A lot of things we see is through media, as you mentioned before, Grace, and I think as someone really involved within media, as in social media like Twitch, YouTube, these other things, they're really big facets of our lives. And a lot of new generations are taking the dialect, the lingo, the vernacular of these influencers and using that in their day to day, even their behavior, their sort of, I guess, patterns as well. That's why they're called influencers, because they influence these people, the audience. Um, and seeing as someone in Gen Z, this equity and justice sort of talk doesn't really resound for anyone there. It mostly is put under the carpet. As I can see, a lot of them do not want to involve themselves in certain facets, certain movements, in order to not uh involve themselves, or in order to not, I guess, mess up their image. And I feel like a lot of people also take on that same approach, despite them not being, let's say, influencers or these big people, because social media, we see it as another part of our lives, an extension. So we also want to put up that, I guess, sort of image that we have of being neutral. But as someone in this generation, I have seen a lot of hope, and where uh on the other side of that, there's also people advocating. It's become stronger, it's become a lot more well known, and it's definitely something that I look forward to see.
Awesome. Yeah, I totally agree with your insights. Like, definitely seeing like very similar things um, on social media as well. I think I'd like to speak more towards what you can do if you are. I mean, I feel like maybe I shouldn't have put this in a way where it's like specifically targeting young people in Gen Z, because I think that anyone of any age and any generation can get involved and start making changes, and like even doing this kind of work. But I think particularly I can only speak to the experience of young people. So I would say that, kind of like similar to what Race is saying, I think it's really, really important as a young person, because you are very easily influenced by the communities that we live in and the schools that we go to and how we grow up and how we're raised. And I think, especially as a young person, it's really important that we're asking those questions. And I encourage young people and people my age to constantly, constantly, constantly ask questions. And when you're online, really think about the content that you are consuming. And again, not everything that you need to do, not everything that you do needs to be involved in social justice and breaking down barriers and institutional racism. Like, obviously, it's very important to rest and have balance. And I think that that's something that's missing a lot from the conversations about social justice and how people can get involved. Because I think, especially for younger generations, that people just get tired and they don't want to do the work of being an activist, because they just see it as like this like identity where you have to do all these things and you never have time to rest, and like you're constantly working, you're constantly going to protests, and like, you know, like just doing these things that are very exhausting, and even like thinking about like structural inequality is exhausting, and people just think of it like, well, if I commit myself to, you know, social justice, I'm just going to be exhausted, and it's going to be very draining physically and emotionally. And I think that we need to sort of reframe that idea that being an activist looks a certain way, like that it means showing up to protest. Like, I've never been to a protest once in my life. And I still consider myself an activist. And so I think that the way that youth needs to think about activism is that it is not necessarily something that you do or a specific identity, but a practice that you do in your daily life. And like Brandon was saying, you don't need to be an influencer. You don't need to be born into a particular background or look a certain way or have a certain lifestyle to be an activist or do this kind of work. If you are asking questions, if you are having these conversations, if you are thinking critically about the reason why things are the way that they are. And like Reese was saying, it's so easy for us to sort of adopt certain doctrines because of the media we consume, or because of the ways that white supremacy is normalized or capitalism is normalized. And asking those questions makes you an activist, in my opinion. And that is the first step to doing this kind of work. Another thing you can do is there's obviously volunteering and being an intern at a number of nonprofits in your community, no matter what country you're in. I don't want this conversation to be United States focused because I think too many things are, but no matter where you live, getting involved, volunteering, even if it's just an hour a week, if you want to do something more tangible, that's also a way. And then obviously making people aware on social media. I know a lot of people will criticize, oh, like those Instagram infographics do nothing. But I think that media is super important. And even if you are annoying some people and, you know, ruining your image of being like, I feel like there's this idea that like people have to be like chill and low key. But, you know, even if you're like ruining your image of being a low key person and people think that you're annoying, I think that even if you're just posting like an Instagram infographic, doesn't even have to be something super serious like, you know, war or like devastation. Even like a simple like post or tweet about, a movie that you're watching and how it talks about, you know, beauty standards or something like that. Something more, I guess, not so like immediate and pressing. Stuff like that, even if it shows up on one person's feed, it gets them to ask these questions. It gets them to maybe look more into it, even if it's not changing their mind. That's also being an activist. So yeah, that is my suggestion if anybody wants to continue this work. And I highly recommend working at CRX Lab. Amazing. It will change your life. And yeah, I think that's all for today.
Thank you so much for that.